Hello, I'm Mandi McLeod. Welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Coming up in the show, electronic identification, a biosecurity must or a technology love child? We look at why national animal identification is struggling to get adopted. Is $8 million too much to pay for knowledge? Forced, the founders for rural science and technology don't think so. And quad bike safety, the Department of Labour reviews and cracks down on farms. Joining me today is industry leader Gerry and Deputy Chair of the Shareholders Council and Chair of the Capital Structure Committee, Ian Brown. Welcome.
Morning, Mandy.
As the date for mandatory electronic ID looms close for the nation's cattle, the debate continues as to whether this is necessary to prevent or mitigate an animal welfare or animal biosecurity outbreak such as foot and mouth. Gerry, what do you think? Is this really the love child of a few control freaks or a genuine tool to help control and manage biosecurity in New Zealand?
I wonder, Mandy, if with the increase in globalisation, whether we as New Zealand need to wake up to our core industry being agriculture, and are we at more risk of biosecurity threats than we have been in the past?
And so what will electronic ID do to help with this? Do you think it's a must that we go electronic ID, or is that something that is, you know, a few technology geeks are putting up there?
I think that what it will do is it will help track what's happening in our industry more closely, and probably the movement that is happening around the animals moving around the country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. Actually, I think it's a real positive for the industry because, you know, the consumers for New Zealand are global. Most industries, in the dairy industry in particular that I'm familiar with, are shifting up in the product range to where consumers are more discerning. So it's only a matter of time. Well, it's probably there already that they are going to demand some transparency on the supply chain. They want traceability. The other benefit of the animal identification scheme is that once you've got the electronic EID in the cow's ear, then you open yourself up in terms of a farmer to modern technology in terms of drafting animals, you know, tracking them, what you've done with them. So, you know, the possibilities are good. I think it's a positive move.
Bruce Wills, who's the president of Federated Farmers, I mean, Feds have been a reluctant, you know, participant in electronic ID, and I guess they're coming on board now. But one of the comments that Bruce makes is that it's the way that it's being sold to farmers, the communication policy, talking to farmers about the importance of EID hasn't been done so well. Is this a fair assessment, do you think, or is there information out there and it's a lack of trust to embrace the technology?
Yes, I think that whenever any organisation or group is trying to get something across the line with farmers or any other industry, the crucial part is communication, and often that is the downfall, you know, and farmers will, without the right information or enough information, will jump to their own conclusions. So perhaps it hasn't quite been communicated to the farmers accurately about what are the benefits for them. On the other side, perhaps farmers are at risk of taking for granted what we have and will not realise what we have until something significant puts our industry at threat.
Hopefully that doesn't happen. Now, an $8 million investment into gene technology where all the commercial gain is going to head offshore to the States is reported to leave agri-research scientists richer for the knowledge and involvement in this groundbreaking research. Do you think that New Zealand dollars should be spent on research that has no financial commercial benefit to New Zealand?
I don't think they should be spent where there's no direct benefit to New Zealand, but I think you've got to be really careful in these areas that we need to, within New Zealand, provide a pathway for young New Zealanders, and part of that is actually having a progression or a succession plan in place. If we suddenly curtail the activities that some of these scientists are taking, because it's groundbreaking stuff, the rewards aren't always guaranteed, and we know that from when we start, then you run the risk of our youngest and brightest effectively will go elsewhere to look for those opportunities. So yes, I agree with you, it's not ideal for the $8 million to go somewhere else. There's always a cost in this, but I think you've also got to weigh up the potential benefits long term.
But do you think that if we don't invest, if this technology isn't invested in New Zealand, that it will go somewhere else and someone else's scientists will actually benefit from the knowledge of cutting edge research, and that New Zealand has got a potential to be a player in holding on to intellectual IP, if you like? that opportunities like this gives us. I mean, it's a fair day's pay for a fair day's work from a science perspective. Gerry?
I think it's up to us to actually acknowledge the resources that we've got within our own country, and if America can see that, then the question needs to be asked, why do we not recognise that for ourselves, and why are we not investing in that? I'd have to agree with Ian that there is an opportunity to keep the scientists there, and that this does help with the learning process that they're definitely going through. But I do also question, why are we not keeping this intellectual property within our boundaries and using it for our benefit and investing in the resources that we've got here at home?
Do you think, though, that science has the opportunity to be just another product and service where we can actually sell some of our intellectual capability by our science and not necessarily having to worry so much about the fact that we may not get the product, but we're selling a service offshore?
Well, it depends what the end game is and why you would engage yourself in that type of arrangement. And I guess you have to be clear on what that end game is. And is there more benefit for New Zealand as a country to harness that ourselves?
Mm-hmm. I want to move on to a topic that's probably quite close to my heart. And it's four-wheel bikes and tractors on farms. They're often mentioned in highlight of living on farms, mentioned by kids in the Straight Furrow stories. But now the Department of Labour are cracking down on quad bike safety after yet another fatality involving these machines. Ian, do you think we've become complacent about the danger of these bikes because they are so commonplace and they're used every single day on farms?
Yeah, absolutely, Mandy. I think it's familiarity breeds contempt. I've been a farmer for 20 plus years now, and I'm probably as guilty as anybody of treating these things without the respect they deserve. So, yeah, and it's a serious wake-up call to New Zealand farmers. I think the stats are we lose a farmer a month, basically in New Zealand, which is horrific. And we've actually got to get our acts together. And the issue's deeper than just four-wheel farm bikes. So, I think the issue's really around total farm systems. It's around how we manage our labour, the systems we have in place, how tired our staff get. They are all factors that contribute to these statistics, and we've got to look at the whole. We've got to look at the whole system, and this is a statistic that we can't put up with. We have to find an answer to this.
Do you think that there's still an ideal that a farm is a playground for kids? That when I grew up, it was kind of acceptable to go down the farm with Dad on the bike and on the tractor. And now we still want to hold on to those ideals of not letting kids miss out on those experiences without really thinking about the danger that these machines are now so much more sophisticated. They go faster. We use them in ways which we probably didn't before. Is that part of the problem? I mean, I know with some of my staff and things, I feel like a nag. Gerry, you've had multiple staff. How do you deal with it?
I think Ian makes a good point that it is time that the culture in the industry actually changed, and there is opportunity for children to learn off farms. I think there's a lot of valuable learning that they get from being involved in a farming enterprise. However, that has to be done responsibly, and there are appropriate times for children to be on farms and children not to be on farms. And I think that the culture definitely has to change. There's a myriad of information out there with regard to safety on farms. You only have to Google on-farm safety in New Zealand and see the number of search results that throw up for the farmer. So the information is there. It is industry supported, and I just think it's time that the farmers actually owned up or faced up to the responsibilities that there are, and perhaps changed the way they did things.
Coming up after the break, Fonterra struggles to convince shareholders that trading amongst farmers will not result in a dilution of ownership. We discuss the pros and cons for this strategy. In an outstanding precedent, iwi, government, community and farmers unite to clean up Lake Ellesmere. And how much control is too much? We look at why New Zealand apple exporters won't support the Horticultural Export Authority. All this when we return. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Now, trading amongst farmers, Ian, it's getting a lot of press, but what is it actually really all about?
Well, trading amongst farmers hasn't changed, Mandy, in reality, from what farmers voted on June the 30th last year. There is certainly some consternation out there in terms of how some of the components of trading amongst farmers are now going to be used, and the custodian in particular. But the reality is the proposal is much the same. It's about getting rid of redemption risk from Fonterra's balance sheet. It's about giving farmers more choice in their investment in Fonterra. And it's around a bit of capital raising for Fonterra in the long term. But by all intents and purposes, the main thrust of trading amongst farmers is removing the redemption risk from Fonterra's balance sheet by allowing farmers to trade shares amongst one another.
So the redemption risk is when a farmer decides to leave Fonterra and cash in their shares, and there's a concern that there'll be a run on shares if a whole bunch of farmers do it and it weakens Fonterra's balance sheet. Is that right?
The reality with the redemption risk as we have it at the moment is that if a farmer chooses to leave, he takes his share capital with him and he also takes his milk. So in order to counteract that, Fonterra would run a more conservative than normal balance sheet, and it would take a different view of its investments than it potentially could if it didn't have the redemption risk or what they term permanent capital within its own balance sheet. Okay. So the long-term benefit should be, if Fonterra does get permanent capital, is increased returns and security for farmers. So
do you think, Gerry, that farmers know enough about the nuts and bolts of trading amongst farmers and what it's going to mean long term for them to make an informed decision on this vote?
I think that farmers clearly understand the position that Fonterra are in with regard to the balance sheet. I think there's no disputing that. Perhaps what's starting to creep in is again that level of communication, and the board have obviously done a lot of preparation to get to this point. And sometimes it's a matter of taking everybody else on that journey that the board have already been on. Clearly in 2007 that was perhaps the downfall, that they didn't perhaps communicate that as effectively to farmers as what they could have. I think farmers realise that there is no going back, that once this decision is made, that it's the die is cast, and it's a big decision for farmers. It's a very it's a business that's often intergenerational, so farmers are perhaps thinking more than just them on their farms, what is going to happen to their sons and daughters that intend to take over the family farm. So it's a trust issue, it's a communication issue. From the media, I gather there's a lot of nervousness for farmers around this, and the communication needs to really take hold of that, and that communication needs to be strong from Fonterra, not from the media based.
Do you think that there's a danger that farmers' intelligence is underestimated and therefore that is affecting the communication? Like certainly some of the media stuff that I see that's put out there, it's not always that flattering to farmers' intellect and being able to see and make the decisions. It seems to be that it's very black and white, that farmers should do it and they're dumb if they don't.
Yeah, I certainly don't agree that farmers aren't intelligent.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I know you're not saying that, Mandy, but I think the concept is pretty straightforward in terms of removing redemption risk. You get farmers to trade amongst one another. The reality is, in order to effect that change and to ensure that the consequences of that action aren't going to be negative long term to farmers, to Gerry's point about intergenerations, and we've got to look out 5, 10, 20 years from here. There's an awful lot of work and a lot of detail that has to go on behind the scenes. It's one thing to say, we'll get farmers to trade with one another, fine. It's another thing to say, how big's the market going to be, how liquid's it going to be, what happens when all the farmers have a low milk price and a high share price? What can we put in place? What are the protections? How do we protect ownership and control? Ownership and control is fundamental to this. It's been fundamental since day one. That hasn't changed. It's about creating a good market for farmers in order that they get fair entry, fair exit. They have a buyer, and there's a buyer and a seller on a day at a fair price, and that we can implement the Trading Amongst Farmers platform. I think to Gerry's earlier point, in that there is no going back, I think Fonterra has actually been very responsible in this, in that the size of the fund they're talking about, or the caps they have in place in terms of shares that are able to be put with a fund, that's a very good protection for farmers. And if they look at that, that is a position where in the future, if farmers decide, and I don't know what they will ever decide in 10 years' time, if they want to buy it back, they still can. So it's not a fait accompli.
Obviously, it's quite a complicated topic, and I am sure it is one we're going to return to, because I think there's so much more that, as you say, on those levels. So I need to move on, but I still think, there's more topic to talk about it. Okay, in a Country 99 news report, Mr Allison of Rocket Apple said the bureaucratic nature of the Horticultural Export Authority would impose extra cost to the industry, was undemocratic and lacked benefits. Growers voted pretty strongly to have a united front for apples to get exported into Australia and to have minimum standards for these apples to go in. The exporters said no way. Gerry, you've got a bit of a marketing background. Why is there such a disparity between the growers and the exporters? Is it greed?
Well, I can't quite understand where the whole thing has fallen down, Mandy. To me, it would make sense to have a standard to export under. So I'm a little perplexed as to why this outcome has come about. Perhaps again it comes down from communication on part of Pipfruit New Zealand. Have they watered down the original proposal as reading that I've done would suggest? I'm not sure, but again I'm not really quite sure. I haven't found enough information that would indicate what's actually really behind this decision.
You know, we have standards whatever we do in life, and boy, if the market's going to determine what you have to comply with, hey, you've just got to get used to it. That's the reality of being a producer. Well,
hopefully it's not at the detriment of the apple growers if substandard apples are exported.
I think there's a lot of history around apples getting into Australia full stop, so I think this just adds to that, you know, growing debate of the whole apple saga.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Lake Ellesmere is New Zealand's 5th largest lake and the most polluted. There's been a pretty outstanding concerted effort by iwi, government, federated farmers, the local farming community and I guess the local community full stop to clean up this polluted lake. Gerry, how hard is it going to be to keep everybody on board as they generate the proposal to clean up Lake Ellesmere?
I think going to be quite difficult and challenging for whoever is charged with that responsibility of leading the project. There seems to be quite significant funds that have been put forward to complete the project, and that's fantastic, and I think it's a great proposal that whoever's initiated it has managed to pull all those groups together. However, you've got some probably quite strong personal outcomes that are wanting to come out of that involvement, and so again leadership and communication is going to be crucial to make sure that the funding is allocated in the right place and for the right reasons.
I agree with Gerry, actually. It's going to be a real challenge, whoever has to run it, to get the outcomes that everybody desires. I mean, I agree with the rationale of cleaning up the lake, and it would be very easy to point the finger at one or two particular areas in which to target on, but you know, whoever has to manage it, they're going to have a task on their hands, but good luck.
One of the interesting things that came out when I was researching this topic was again a slight attack at dairy farmers for their pollution, or, you know, for causing the pollution. Surprisingly, a counter to that came from a sheep and cattle farmer who lives pretty much on the boundary and has a section of lakefront. And he was saying that the lake supports a large population of feral wildlife, ducks, geese, etc., and that their feces, if you like, is undiluted and going straight into the lake. And being such a shallow lake, that must surely have much of an impact, more so potentially than any effluent that has been filtered, you know, through the soil and everything to get there. Do you think we're not paying enough attention to that, and that dairy is just an easy target?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And I totally agree. It is definitely an easy target.
But I think we've got to mature past that, and that's the first place you look. But yeah, I agree with you. And just looking at lakes and rivers around where I live, and you see a big duck populations. I mean, everything contributes. We just have to be really clear on the outcomes we are trying to achieve from it, and the expectation.
Yep, the dirty creatures, ducks anyway, aren't they? After the break, we're going to ask Gerry and Ian what's got their goat. Is it going to be a rant, or will it be a rave? You'll have to join us after the break to find out. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. It's time now for our weekly rant and rave. Gerry.
This was interesting. I couldn't decide whether to rant or whether to rave, but I have decided that I'm going to rant, and my chosen topic is Andrew Ferrier. I feel that there's a great article about him in a latest publication that I've read. He's joined Fonterra 2 years into the merger, and if the article was correct, and I do recall when he first joined the company, there was a lot of resentment, a lot of issues that had to be sorted out. So he really had a very difficult job to try.
Hospital pass.
Yeah, definitely a hospital pass in pulling the company together. Since his time at the helm of CEO, he has really stamped his mark on the company. He's proven that he clearly understands strategy. They've formed a very strong strategy. He's formed a very strong management team. And of course, there are going to be casualties along the way when any new CEO steps into the company. But I actually admire his ability to stick to his core values and to actually build a company where it does feel like the 16,000 employees and 10,000 farmers are all pulling in generally the same direction. So that is my rave. Rave.
You can have a positive rant. We don't mind.
So I think well done on him, and I think the farmers have benefited from his involvement in the company.
Yes, it's going to be big boots to fill, isn't it?
Definitely. Yes, definitely.
Ian.
Mandy, I've got a rant, and being a dairy farmer, I'm really disappointed in the last week at a couple of tragic deaths on dairy farms, and we've got a real, as farmers, we've really got to step up and sort this out. It's just not good enough. We're effectively, we're doing our image no good at all. Other industries that you would consider far more dangerous than ours have a much better safety record. You know, we're damaging our reputation, we're damaging the next generation of farmers, and we're damaging those people that look at farming as an opportunity for their children and families as well. So as farmers, you know, we've got to step up to the plate, we've got to start to sort this out, we've got to take it seriously, and we've got to make sure that our employees go home at night in the same condition they turned up in the morning, maybe a little bit more tired.
I was going to say, maybe sometimes better.
They can be a bit tired, but not so tired that they're going to hurt themselves the next day.
So how practically do you think we do that? Because one of the challenges that I see out there is we've got young people on farms, or sometimes mature people, that are resistant to wearing helmets, to taking on the safety gear. Do we actually just have to man up, if you like, and say, no helmet, no job?
I think so, and look, I'm as guilty as anybody at not wearing all the safety gear. You know, there are two parts to it, and certainly safety gear is mandatory and should be worn. But it's the attitude that goes with it that's important, Mandy. And it's about thinking smart. It's about when you do a task, you know, what can I hurt, what can I damage? What if I break my leg out the back of the farm and nobody comes to get me? You know, what if I dislocate my shoulder in the milking shed? I'm off work for quite a while, and that's just minor injuries. You know, the deaths are absolutely tragic.
Yeah, they are. And I guess as somebody, you know, who has had quite a significant accident on farm, it only takes a split second to be kicked in the head by a horse, in my case, to roll a four-wheeler, in my case, to break an ankle getting over a fence, in my case. You know, and these don't even involve...
You haven't considered another occupation, have you, Mandy?
Yeah, I'm on TV. I guess, you know, the worst I could get is you know, I don't know, ear damage from my earpiece.
Fall off your chair or something.
Well, that's happened. So, yeah, it bothers me when people don't take safety, and they're kids. You know, as an employer or a contractor, it really bothers me that I have to go and tell people, or even as a consultant, watching other people on farm and having to tell them, you know, it's not okay. It's not okay to have your kids sitting on the front of a tractor or even balanced on the front of your four-wheeler. You know, at least, you know, where does personal responsibility come into this?
I think that, if I can comment on your rant, I think us as an older generation of farmers need to actually set the example, and you know, it's us that need to wear the helmets on the bikes to show the young staff that we employ that, hey, it's okay. And so I think some of the responsibility sits with us as older farmers to actually set that example by not actually saying you must do it, but
we do it.
Yeah, hey, actually I'm going to do it too, and actions speak louder than words.
Now I've got a wee rant. I'm sick of dairy farmers taking the rap for pollution. And as I sat in my commute up to Auckland, in the traffic, for at least 1 hour, bumper to bumper, on the Southern Motorway, it struck me how much pollution was being caused just by that traffic alone. So I'm sorry, but we need to balance the accusations here and look at what pollution is coming out of the cars and not just out of dairy cows. So it's not just cow farts, it's car farts as well. And that's my rant for the day, and that ends our show. So I'd really like to thank you two for coming on. It's been brilliant, great conversation. So that wraps up the latest edition of Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'd like to thank again my guests, Gerry Glover and Ian Brown. And of course, thanks to you too for watching. Remember to check out my blog online at country99tv.co.nz. I love hearing from you. I'll catch you next week, and in the meantime, keep on smiling.